The Jehovah's Witnesses, what do they believe? What's with their history? And how do you reach them with the gospel of Jesus Christ? This is People of the Free Gift, where we ground believers in their identity in Christ and equip them to reach those caught in religion. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and click right there on the watermark to subscribe anytime during this video. Enable notifications if you want to know when I release new videos, which is several times a week. And we are discussing today my recently released book, Sharing Jesus with the Cults, available on Amazon as paperback or Kindle. And if you're interested, check out the description down below, because there's ways in which you can get a free copy of this book. And so today we're going to be talking about chapter 10 in the book, an overview of the teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so let's go ahead and jump right in. So most of us know that they don't, take blood transfusions. They don't celebrate holidays. They don't enlist in governmental type of things. So that's, most of us know that about Jehovah's Witnesses. But and then they limit contact with non-Jehovah's Witnesses. Sorry, can't read my own writing, right? I mean, how bad is that? They forbid critical thinking, mandatory door-to-door witnessing, New World Translation, and that's their own translation of the Scriptures, which is really not a translation. It's more of they claim that they use the Greek manuscripts. In fact, they have their own interlinear translation to try and justify their translations. But there's blatant times in which, like John 1:1, where they translate it in order to fit their own worldview and teachings. And that's one of the key characteristics of a cult. Typical get-togethers. So what do they look like when they get together? Well, it's not like church like you and I know it. It is like when they get together, they have copies of the Watchtower and Awake magazines, which are Jehovah's Witnesses, put out by Brooklyn in their headquarters. And then they will partner up, and they will go over the questions and the answers in that material until they kind of know it. And that's to prep them for their door-to-door witnessing that they're going to be doing during the week. And then you have the Watchtower, or the Brethren, or the wise and discreet slave that Jesus referred to in the parables. They believe that's all pointing to the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses, which originally was Charles Taze Russell, and then was passed on to Judge Rutherford. And currently it's not a particular person, but it's more the organization of the Watchtower that is, everything comes through them. So all of the teaching, all of the materials that are acceptable for them to read and to hand out and go through and base their beliefs off of are all coming from them. And so then you got false prophecies, 1914, 1917, 1918, 1925, 1975. All of these things, they predicted either the end or Armageddon or second coming, all of these things. And so those were all false prophecies. So what do they believe? Let's start out with Jesus. So what do they believe about Jesus? They believe that Jesus is the angel Michael, the archangel, okay? And that he is the first creation of God. So God, Jehovah God, and you call him Jehovah God because it's important that you call him by his name. That's very important to them. And so Jehovah God creates Jesus. Jesus creates everything else. So, or everything else is created through Jesus, you could say. And so Jesus is not equal to, he's not co-equal, he's not co-eternal. They don't believe in a Trinity. They don't believe Jesus is God. They believe Jesus is a God. And more to that in videos to come. And in fact, check out my playlist on the Jehovah's Witnesses, on which we have material on how to deal with that in particular. And so Jesus, he obviously died on a stake, not a cross. and they believe that's important. They don't believe in a physical bodily resurrection, but rather more of a spiritual resurrection of Jesus. And so then the resurrection itself, they believe that our bodies cease to exist when we die, and then we go, it's not soul sleep with the Jehovah's Witnesses, more like you cease to exist. And then the resurrection is going to be completely physical at the end, which is weird because they don't believe the resurrection of Jesus was physical. And it's going to be like a new creation, or he's going to completely resurrect that old, done away with body and then judge you. And then you're going to either go to heaven, and we'll get to that in a second, or you're going to go to the resurrected earth, you could say. So, the kingdom is, let's go ahead and talk about it. So heaven, only 144,000 they believe are going to go to heaven, and as far as I know, those spots are filled. And but yet every year when they take communion, it's kind of a big event where they celebrate the death of Jesus, not the resurrection of Jesus, the death of Jesus. You probably have gotten invitations in the mail from about this. When they get together and do that, they take communion, but the only ones who are supposed to take communion are those who feel like they've had a witness that they are part of the 144,000. So most places, when you take communion with Jehovah's Witnesses, nobody is taking communion. So kind of weird if you're coming from a Christian point of view. And so where do the rest of the people who believe and are part of Jehovah's Witnesses and they know the truth about Jesus and they believe it, where do they go? Well, they go to the restored earth, in which is going to be made into a paradise, okay? And so they believe all of those promises, like, the wolf laying down with the lamb and all those things are referring to the restored earth. And that's where people are going to populate. In fact, it's going to be like you're sent here to restore it, like the rebuilding process, and then you get to enjoy it after that. And so annihilation, I talked about that, we cease to exist at death, but for those who are not believers, they don't believe in hell. In fact, Charles Taze Russell despised the whole Calvinistic, hell interpretation of things, and that's one of the reasons why he, kind of broke off. And so they believe that the soul is annihilated, the person just completely ceases to exist, and that is the judgment for those who are unbelievers. So 1914, it was the beginning of the end, World War I, World War II going on at that time. They believed that was the beginning of the end that was going to usher in Armageddon, the second coming. And so obviously their group would be critical and a part of that. I talked about the 144,000, Jehovah by name. They believe that is his name, which is ridiculous. If you take in Hebrew, you know that they would not have pronounced it Jehovah. It would have been Yahweh, or closer to that. In fact, they wouldn't pronounce it at all if they were Hebrew. They would have believed that was blasphemy to try and pronounce it would be taking the name of the Lord in vain. So nobody would have said it. That's one of the reasons they had a problem with Jesus claiming to have this special relationship with God, even equality with God in the New Testament. And so Charles Taze Russell, let's talk a little bit about him before we get out here. And that is the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but it didn't really start there. Charles Taze Russell was a follower of a guy named William Miller, who many of you may know that name from the Great Disappointment in 1844. He convinced a lot of people that he had predicted the date of the end. They sold property. They got rid of everything they had. They were dressed in white, waiting on a mountain. Jesus doesn't show up. And William Miller recants, and he kind of gets out of the ministry at that point. But he had two followers, and you could check out another video that we have on the Seventh-day Adventists. One of those followers was Ellen G. White, one of the principal founders of the Seventh-day Adventists, and then the other was Charles Taze Russell. His group was called Bible Students. Okay, so then Charles Taze Russell, his explanation was that this was the beginning of the end, that Jesus did come invisibly. and that it ushered in the beginning of the end. And so you have this apocalyptic feel to things, this Adventist type of feel to things. And Charles Taze Russell was also quite interesting. He has some interesting views on like the Great Pyramid of Giza, and that's one of the reasons they have so many false prophecies, is because he believed the calculations of the tunnels within the Great Pyramid were actually prophetic, that was put there by God in order to tell us things about the end. And so with that whole thing, the explaining away what happened in 1844, kind of when you start off at that foundation, things don't go well. And so all of the false doctrines that followed that we talked about are really the result of all of that stuff. And so I just wanted to touch base on some of the terminology that Jehovah's Witnesses use. And so when you're talking to people who are in cults, often what they do is a strategic thing, that they take words that Christians are used to hearing and understanding and using, and they will give different definitions to them. And so all of the following terms, and you can ask me down below if you're curious. I would be glad to answer it for you. Armageddon, the anointed class, Bethel, blood guilt, Christendom, circuit assembly, circuit overseer, disfellowship, district overseer, expelling, faith, Gentile times, goodwill, person, great crowd or other sheep, hell, impalement of Jesus, New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, or NWT, People's Pulpit Association, publisher, salvation, and theocracy. Those are some of the key terms that you're going to need to be aware of, and there's many, many more. I'm sure that the key in that is really just asking the person you're talking to, what is it that you believe? How do you interpret this? That's the only way you're going to get to know that person and know how God's leading you to witness to that person. Oftentimes we make the mistake of watching a video like this, thinking that we know enough about what the institution teaches, so we assume that's what this person must believe, and then we go out and we witness, and not realizing that we're actually making a lot of assumptions, and we're beating up straw men because we're arguing against things that they never believed in the first place. And so go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with others. Put it in the comments down below. I reply to everyone. I want to know what your questions are about cults. Have you had encounters with the Jehovah's Witnesses? What questions do you have about Jehovah's Witnesses? What material would you like me to cover in the future about the Jehovah's Witnesses? And until next time, may His power be with you.